you never let doubt dim your light, because what you have to say or some of the things that you do, it's important. And at times you just may be in the wrong environment where your light is not appreciated. And if that's the case, it's time to go. And you go to a place where your light is appreciated. So never lose that. Never forget about that, because I think we all have value to bring in the situations and scenarios and environments that in which we show up. But just know, look, it's honest. You may not be for everybody, but you are for somebody. And so don't let other people dim your light. Don't let your doubts dim your light. Go where you can shine.
Welcome back to the Myth Slayer Cafe. I have with me today in the house, Brian Aquart. Brian, welcome to Myths, Leadership, and Life. Brian, the subject of our discussion today is my personal favorite god of all of them, the one who's been my avatar and my guiding light ever since I was 9 years old. Helios, god of the sun. Talk to us a little bit about Helios and exactly why he resonates with you.
Yeah, Scott, when I got this initial question, I was like, you really made me think, right? And so it was good to kind of go down that path. And so what I really like about Helios is, his ability to conjure and emanate great light, right? And the reason why it connected with me so much is because I think about some of the situations and the projects and initiatives that I may lead professionally, and some of the things I do personally. I try to bring light to situations, right? I try to showcase and highlight certain things in a certain way, different causes and initiatives. And at times I bring, in a good way, a level of intensity, strength, and precision with that light, because I do think the things that I'm involved with personally and professionally are important. So that's why he really stuck with me. And I'm glad that he's one of your favorites, because look, I don't think I told you this before, but I was researching for about a good hour thinking about like, oh, which one really stuck with me. And when I found that one, that was my guy.
I love hearing that. Sorry to make you work more than you already are, though. Hey,
all good.
But it's going to be worth it for the audience. One of the things you said a minute ago, I can really relate to, and that is intensity. Helios, as is true with the actual sun, was so bright that if you looked at him, you would go blind. So he had this duality to him. On the one hand, he could blind you. On the other hand, if you were blind and he touched your eyes, you were given the ability to see. And there have been other guests, one by the name of 𝗕𝗹ecie, who immediately comes to mind, who pointed out in the discussion of their deities, Sarah's was Selene, the goddess of the moon, that the sun can be too bright to bear for some people, or it can be too much sometimes. You said that you bring, like I mentioned a second ago, intensity into the room as a leader. You and I both worked for New York City government in both legal and executive capacities for a while. And, I'm proud, I think, to say that I brought a lot of intensity into the job, because what we were doing was important and it mattered, but it could be difficult for people to swallow. And in the case of those who worked with me, I, looking back, sometimes wonder if they felt like Helios never went over the horizon and gave them a sunset. Have you ever experienced that? And maybe to start off with, we can talk about, well, if you are naturally an intense leader, how do you navigate that with regards to working on projects that you're involved in and the people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because because at times the word intense can be taken in a negative connotation. When I say intense, I'm thinking about there's a passion that I bring to this work, right? And so in my case, in some of the things, whether it was at the city or in healthcare now, I always have to be mindful that at times, if there's like something that I'm really into and I'm like, hey, I see where this thing is going, I'm coming in full throttle. But I need to make sure that I try to balance that out with others because they may not be coming to a situation in the same way. So some of the things I do is I don't mince words with anyone either. I share very upfront, like, hey, I'm really into this. If I'm ever coming across as too much, or if some of the directives or things that I'm saying is like, hey, it's a lot, you just please let me know. Like, regardless of my title, right? I did it when I was in the HR space. I've did it in the investigation space. And even now that, I lead cross-functionally, I genuinely want people to tell me like, hey, you know what? You're pushing kind of hard right now. Maybe, take it back a little bit. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because there are sometimes, as you can imagine, and as you've probably been through, if something is like, oh, like this is a good thing and we don't want to mess this up, we want to do it right, I will work on that and I will do everything I can to make sure this goes about the right way. But at times, you just have to make sure, you're not, burning any bridges along the way.
Before I ask any direct follow-up questions to that, I do have to know, though, when you've told people that, particularly if they are on your staff, do they really believe you? And if so, how do you get them to actually think that's something other than BS?
Great question. So I have, and I'm thinking of a young lady right now, a couple roles ago, I used to tell her the same thing, like, hey, keep me honest, right? And at first she probably was a little hesitant because I am, I was, she reported directly to me. But she tried it one time and I was like, thank you, right? Thank you. Because I wanted to make sure there was probably something we were doing with like talent assessments or something like that I was really trying to push on. And I was pushing her a little bit too much, right? And not recognizing that because there was so many other things that I had going on that I was like, hey, maybe the deadline I was asking for was a bit too much or a bit too quick, given some of the things she had going on. And she told me about it. And so I appreciated it. And there were no consequences from that. And I think after that, she recognized, like, oh, okay, he's not just BSing me around here. He genuinely means that, because I do very much so listen to feedback. I definitely listen to feedback and I try to pivot when I can, but always try to take that in.
It's interesting because when I had my final position with the city, it was a very high level one. And there was someone who was being brought in to be my deputy. And my own boss, I found out just a couple of weeks ago, which is long after the job was over. My boss pulled this deputy into her office before she started and said, look, Scott can be a lot. So if he's ever too much for you, why don't you come and talk to me? I was like, why didn't you tell me that before? Of course she wasn't going to tell me. She wasn't going to tattle on her boss's boss and get herself mired in that. But it was really sort of an eye-opening moment. On the other hand, look, the sun is at its foundation highly energetic. It is inexhaustibly, for the purposes of human lifespans at least, energetic. And the supply that it has, it pushes out with such force and fervor that literally, both in myth and in reality, it's able to light up and bring growth and fire and all sorts of energy and forward motion into the entire world. When you are being told this, or when you are being conscious about the extent to which that energy is coming out, do you have any internal tricks that you might use in order to modulate so you get told these things less and less over time? Or are you just sort of like, yo, okay, that's who I am, and let me just rely on external people telling me because, hey, they know me better than me?
Yeah, so I do have some internal checks and balances, right? There's a feeling that you get when you know, not necessarily when you're right, but you know when it's like, hey, this is something big that we're working on and everyone needs to like really lock in on this. There's a certain feeling I get that I have to know, like, oh, this is building up. Okay, I'm a big like breath work person. And so I'll do a, hey, you know what, before this meeting or before X thing, let me just take a minute, do some breaths, right? Do some controlled breathing. You ever heard of like box breathing?
Talk to the audience about that. That's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, so it's like I did like a guided meditation once, and it was like you take a breath in for like you could do it fours or sevens, right? I think I was doing sevens, but you type breathe in 7 seconds, you breathe out 7 seconds, same thing, and you do it 4 times, right? And you do that over the course of, you pick your poison, but I was doing it over a minute, and it's a great way to really like regulate yourself, not only emotionally and physically, but just like mentally, like, okay, it's so calming. And you literally count, right? Like you count the breaths, like you're not count the breaths, but you count when you're inhaling, you count to seven. When you breathe out, you're counting to seven in your mind. And you do that over a course of a minute. And that has amazing effects. The first time I'd ever done that was probably like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it is something that I continue to do, probably not as much as I should, but I do that, especially when I feel myself getting worked up, either work situation or any other situation, because I know that like, all right, how can I approach this next situation in a calm, clear manner? This is one of my internal checks and balances that I can do, that I should do.
What you're hinting at without directly saying is that for someone who might be by his own nature energetic to start off with, to have a lot of that sun fire within, even on a down day, emergencies, crises, deadlines, pressure can amp up that energy level even more, maybe even cause a few solar flares. In a way, working for government, there tends to be, once you hit a certain level, a couple of things that happen over and over again. First of all, just bosses that have deadlines that are put upon you that they're hysterical about because they're hysterical. Then you have emergencies that arise because in those sorts of positions, you as often as not are responsible for something or another that is involved directly in crisis management. In either situation, I, for one, felt oftentimes more alive than ever during the emergencies or during the critical situations. It's almost like the pressure of the deadline or the stakes involved in whatever crisis that my team or I were leading the response to put an additional level of electricity within everything that I was projecting out into the world. And when I would be out of that crisis, it's almost like a cloud would come over the sun. It wouldn't be a dark day, but somehow I would feel as though my life force, my vibrancy had dimmed a little bit. And it was hard for me not to become addicted to that sort of way of being. Have you ever experienced anything like that? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I have. And I've fortunately at times, maybe unfortunately, everyone look at it, have burned that oil on both ends, and at times almost burned myself out because of that. So I'll go back to my city government role, the initial one when I worked at in fire. And what I was responsible for, leading compliance investigations, and within a certain period of time. My claim to fame that truthfully nobody cares about, but I think it's a fun fact that I've visited every single firehouse and every single EMS station in the city of New York.
That is fun.
Yeah,
I do care. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. But setting up that schedule, and because we were under court monitorship at the time, so we had to do these things. I had to set a very aggressive type of schedule in order to get these things done, and it required a level of intensity and time that, it was a lot. It was really a lot. To your point that when it was done, when I could finally say like, oh, boom, I got this done in a year, it was almost like, oh, what's next? Like it was, what is after this? Like I loved, and this may sound weird, but I loved like the pressure of the moment, because you had to do something by X time. And it was like, oh, I got this, right? I always say, you ever heard the phrase, pressure can either bust pipes or make diamonds.
Yeah.
And in my choice, I choose to shine, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I like to do. And so when that pressure hit me, I was like, oh, I got it. I got it no matter what. And so when I did it, afterwards, it was a very empty feeling because you were up so much during that time that it's kind of a downer, to be honest. And then the second one I had was actually during COVID. This one I think I handled a bit better, but being involved now in a healthcare capacity, at that time worked at a very large hospital. And during that initial wave, New York got hit hard, very hard.
Yeah.
And so I was a part of working with our leadership team for the redeployment efforts and making sure that people could get to certain areas. Some areas had shut down, but they needed extra bodies in another place.
Yeah.
And that was so intense. It was intense and it was sad at the same time because what you're dealing with is obviously so much loss of life, right?
Yeah.
And then also fear for yourself, fear for your family,
Yeah.
fear for your friends. So that was a different level of intensity. It was almost like, I'm trying to do something, and eventually did, to help save people's lives. So like that level of intensity came with like, wow, there's a real meaning behind what I'm doing now. Before, it's like, let's be honest, like no one really cares if I, did an inspection at some house and found something, right? I mean, yeah, it helped, but this is more like, you can put somebody in the right place that could potentially allow them to be monitored in a way that saves their lives and helps them, obviously, their family. Like this, it's just so much. And so, yes, that was intense, but it was intense, I think, for the right reasons.
COVID raises an interesting issue, though. I can see how that deadline of 1 year that you had to ensure that the compliance occurred would have allowed you to burn bright, and then once it was over, have that sigh of relief, do what Helios did. Helios got into a gigantic cup and went on a river underneath the earth and took a long nap and relaxed back to his castle, and then chilled out a little bit, had something to eat before his day started again. You hopefully took a little bit more time than that to yourself. But the COVID situation is different, because that crisis didn't really have a set end. Some people would argue that we are still in it. Others might have said that the crisis was all just manufactured. Others would say, well, it ended at XYZ period. When you're talking about having the extra burst of energy which powers you through crises, how do you navigate or prevent yourself from literally being like the sun if he never had a chance to set, flaming out and causing disaster for everyone and everything around you?
Yeah. And I got to thank the Peloton bike for that, because I think what happens is, we were all working in this time period where there was no end in sight, right?
Yeah.
There were very intense weeks, very intense days, obviously. But what helped me decompress were things like riding a bike, right? Just riding a, exercise bike or going for a run or something like that. But I had to be intentional about it, because you could work truthfully all day on these things. Like I had folks who were part of our nursing, they were like former nurse managers who were talking with units about bodies that they needed. I had folks over here doing what we could have talked all day, but we were all very intentional about making sure that we had a time to shut off, because we couldn't do everything at once. And it's tough, especially in healthcare. And look, and I'm no clinician, so I've never been at the bedside or anything like that. But I worked with a lot of folks who were clinicians, who are clinicians. And so that healthcare hook, that life or death hook, is something that is in them. And so they have a hard time turning it off as well. And I did too, just as a regular layperson when it comes to healthcare, at least, or clinical care, at least. And so I had to be very intentional to make sure that my sun didn't just keep burning, by saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to shut down at this time, and I'm going to go for a bike ride, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm just going to veg out with my kids. I have to do this because, no, but yeah, I did think about the time back at the department, because I remember that once that time frame was done with the compliance inspections, I think I was burned out. I mean, I was done. I was like, wow, this was great. And don't get me wrong, like the overtime was great too that I was pulling in because of it. But that was a lot. That was a lot. And I could have taken care of myself a lot better during that time when I was in such an intense moment in the healthcare space. I was like, you know what? I can't do this for 20 hours, sure. Or I can't do this for 16 hours, sleep for 4 and get up and do, like, I can't do that again. You need to take better care of yourself this time. And I think I did a much better job with that.
A client of mine who's very ambitious recently had a series of conversations that he scheduled intentionally in preparation for our coaching work together with some of the people he knew who were the most successful as leaders. They were, in some cases, multimillionaires, maybe even more than that, or had reached very, very high levels of success in whatever other sector they were involved in. And he said one of the things that he was struck by in talking to them was how many of them had seen their relationships destroyed, didn't have friends, or had substance abuse problems. Helios himself was highly committed to his mission. Literally, he woke up, took that chariot over the sky every single day, come heck or high water, and never stopped for anything. He never took a vacation. The world could not afford that. His biggest priority was making sure that his duty and his responsibility were always upheld. And so, unlike many other Greek gods and goddesses, he did not have a consort. He simply focused on his work. Do you think that it is realistic, hitting a certain level, to be able to say, I'm going to take care of myself and be there with my family if the work pressure demands are that great? Like, were there periods during the COVID early days or other points in your career in which you simply had to put family and health and other concerns aside in order to do what you needed to?
At times, yes. I think that initial part of, or the initial time frame in COVID was intense because it was all kind of mired in confusion. Like, what is going on here right now? Thankfully, what I was able to do, though, is I took my family so I'm originally from Michigan. I took them to Michigan. My parents were in Florida at the time, so obviously the house I grew up with was vacant, right? And so we hung out there for a very long time. And what was interesting is that because what we did is we worked in wave and worked in shifts, because one of the things about the virus was if someone got sick and then contaminated everybody, the whole office could have got shut down. Yeah. So what we did is, to avoid that, was we had, A team and B team, right? And no better or worse. It just, team 1, team 2, right? And so during that time, if it was my time to be in the office, I would need to be here. And so there were times I had to, yes, leave my family to take care of the work that I needed to do. And that was often very tough. The upside was that I could get to New York from Michigan in literally 7 hours straight, which I'll probably never be able to do again because the roads were so empty.
Oh, you drove it?
Oh, I drove it. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, I drove it. Yeah, I drove it. So I was doing that, and then it was great because you'd be on for, I think, a couple of weeks, and then you'd be off, but like working remote, and so I could work remote with the family. So I was found a way to balance that. But yes, there are times, and I'm sure a lot of men and women go through this, that at times the work that you do, does require you to, I mean, you never forget about your family, but there are things that force you to go into the office that take you away from your loved ones for periods of time. I've tried to balance that the best way that I can. But no one's perfect. No one's perfect.
And I know that personally, on the subject of not being perfect, that balance, I don't know, Brian, if I even really think of it as balance at this point in my life. I try and think of it as something like integration or right,
harmony.
Because working for myself, I could, well, even when I was working with the government or in other jobs, I could, like you said earlier, be doing stuff all day. There was always more to do. But a lot of times in working for yourself or in any leadership position, really, like the things that have to be done that seem endless really actually do need to be done. It's not a matter of, oh, this is optional to wait for a while. This happens now. Crisis situations often are accompanied by crises in other areas too that are related. I very seldom have seen just one crisis at a time happen conveniently, after each other so that people have a chance to relax between them. They all seem to blow up at the same time, or at least more than one as often as not. And so the idea of balancing it versus integrating really has been the only way I can figure out how to handle it. A big issue, though, is, well, how then, thinking about the relationships that you have with children and your wife or your husband or whatever other partner you might have, how do you make sure that during those periods they understand or can see an end? How do you make sure that the relationship's integrity isn't being lost, particularly if the crisis goes on for a long time, like COVID, that went on for months and months and months and months and months, at least here in New York City?
Yeah, I think it's really about communication. Scott, when I think about this, like it's no secret about what was happening during that time. And then about really, I just had to explain, well, here's my role in all of this. And at times it was difficult to share, well, why, if I'm not hands-on with patients, right? What do I need to be in the office for? And that was a difficult conversation to have. Because one of the things that goes with representing clients and supporting clients is being there for them, not only just virtually, but at times physically. And so it was important that we showed solidarity with the business. And so I had to explain that. So really just communicating openly in that regard. The other thing I'll share is that one of the things that came out of COVID, and you're seeing it now, and we could probably go back and forth on this, but people's level of comfortability with remote work has gone up, in my opinion, obviously has gone up. Organizations at times level of comfortability with people continuing to work remote, I think has gone in the opposite direction, right? For reasons around collaboration and things like that. What I found now, though, when we talk about integration and harmony, which is how I look at it as well, is I'm at a space now where I can say I have a bit more control over my schedule, and I have a bit more control even when there are fires that are taking place. Here's my role in that. And because the nature of my work takes me to a variety of different places, I could truthfully be anywhere and knock it out. And it's a recent epiphany I came to, finally, but I came to it nonetheless, that I think has been helpful in trying to navigate that space with your partner or significant other or something like that.
These shifts that have accompanied the increased awareness, whether positive or negative vis-a-vis remote work, have accompanied some other shifts that I see either being considered by leaders or maybe should be considered by leaders. I'll give a little story that illustrates what I'm talking about. Pre-pandemic, many years before the pandemic, to be honest, I worked for an organization that had a number of attorneys in it, and most of these attorneys had offices. And the offices were set up with a door and a little glass window by the door. And one day, my boss happened to be walking the floor and saw one of the attorneys at his desk sleeping in the middle of the day. I think it was during the lunch hour. And she was very furious. Now, this attorney was not a direct staff member of mine. He was about 3 levels below me, but nonetheless, as the person responsible for that division, as well as for the supervision of the 2 levels between me and that attorney, I was called on the carpet about that happening. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh my God, what a horror. How could he be taking a nap during his lunch hour? That is outrageous. This is every horrible thing that I have never taken a nap during my lunch hour. We are here to work, blah, 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 on and on and on and on. COVID comes. People are working remotely. And suddenly there seems to be more people taking time during the day because no one is directly watching them to take a nap, maybe to go to the grocery store when it's not packed full of people, to get packages, but working later than they might have because childcare requirements changed during the pandemic. Remote work allows them to do that. And since, like I mentioned a minute ago, you can't monitor what everyone is doing every second of the day when they're in another location, people had to chill out about some things. And there are things like sleeping on the job or maybe being less than efficient for every second during your prescribed work hours that I really look back on the pre-COVID era and think, God, my intensity, my solar flares were probably keeping people from doing things like taking naps that somehow we managed to survive through during COVID, and really reconsider a lot of these managerial imperatives. Did you experience anything like that?
I'm glad that you mentioned that because I think it's almost like the pandemic opened up just just common sense attitudes about how people are actually working. Let's be honest. Nobody is working a full 7 hours straight from the beginning, and what's funny is that when people often talk about that, like, oh, people need to be productive and all that. But then in the same breath, they also mention, oh, well, you can't have those conversations at the water cooler. Okay. Well, those water cooler conversations arguably are work, non-work, right? But a lot of times fluff. And yes, it's relationship building and all that. And I don't take anything away from that. But those conversations at times, and I'll throw in, and I've had cases like this before, cigarette breaks, smoke breaks, which you know how that goes. 8 minutes a break, 4, 5, 6 times a day can add up. You're not working. And so it's almost like this pandemic, when folks started now working remotely and we had all this time, it's like common sense came back into it. Why don't we let people be people as opposed to this kind of, dictatorial type of management style of, hey, you need to be here and doing this, that, and the third, right? I think it opened up so much. And now, I think I don't know if you intended or unintended, but it's almost like a perfect segue for then people started leaving their jobs, which hence I then start this whole show about. But you hear people are like, wow, I didn't know I was going this hard at work. Maybe their sun flares were bursting at work. Yeah. The pandemic forced people to slow down. It forced managers, maybe like yourself as well, to reconsider how they're leading, how they're managing. And I think there was a whole host of epiphanies that occurred. And to your point about folks working remote, and I've had situations like this in the past. Like if I was working remote, do you know what it feels like to get laundry done at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday?
Heaven.
And you're like, oh my God, I don't have to do this on Sunday night now. Yeah. That is phenomenal. That is amazing that we're able to do that.
Oh my, it's so true.
Yeah, right. It was like little stuff like that. You're just like, oh man, damn, that was such a relief. Now the weekend, I can actually chill out on the weekend as opposed to Sunday, doing all the grocery shopping, doing all the cleaning, doing all the laundry. No, I can actually have a weekend because you know what? I have time between 2 and 4. It's a lull. Let me do some work for a little bit, but I'm going to go and do this. and knock this out. And then to your point, I'll then stay on an extra couple hours, right? Because I can. But now I got all this stuff done. It was life-changing for a lot of people. And you see that now. And you see now this battle happening between employers and employees about this whole return to work piece. And I am curious about where this is going to go, because I often say that a lot of this in specific industries, right? Not every industry, truthfully, can do the whole remote work thing, right? It just doesn't work out that way. But for those that can, I think a lot of this has to do with real estate, and that, you have all this space that you have for your team members. You better use it, right? Because we're paying for it. Someone needs to occupy that. So I'm just curious to see where it's going to go. But yes, I've had those moments where I'm like, wow, like, yeah, this. And I've always been a flexible leader anyway. Like, I just want people to get the work done. That's all I really care about. Wherever you do it from, cool. But let's get it done.
Do you think that the pandemic has given those leaders who choose to operate this way a way to almost view their work environments holistically, as if they were like Helios, the sun, who, when he was riding through the sky, could literally see everything that was happening in the world? And I say that with a little bit of irony, because on the one hand, the remote work experience took away the opportunity that a lot of leaders had to be able to see what was going on a micro level in the office, like whether someone was taking a nap at 1 p.m, or whether someone was hanging around having coffee longer than they needed to, or going to the bathroom too often, or sitting in the lunchroom gossiping for too long. But it gave them that Helios-like macro view as to, well, what was really necessary for people to be productive and what was really important and not. Do you think that people will be sort of trending more in that direction, or do you think this is a sort of lesson that might just sort of be forgotten as the quote-unquote post-pandemic period stretches out?
Scott, I hope it's not a lesson that's forgotten. I think it has opened up leaders' eyes to continue to focus on the big picture. And maybe that's just the optimist in me, wishing and hoping that this has opened their eyes to that. Because I think what's important is that whatever your field of work is, and whatever it is you are tasked with getting done, it's either done or it's not. It's either done on time or it's not.
Right.
And whoever is doing it or supposed to be doing it for you, they either did it on time and did it right for you, or they didn't. And so those are the things that we should be potentially having disciplinary conversations with them about their inability to do the work. And I'll be honest, when it comes to lunch hours, Myers, you could do anything you want on lunch hour, right? Obviously legal, right? But you could do anything you want on lunch hour. So if you choose to sleep on lunch hour, that is okay. Now, are you sleeping in a public space where like it's bringing disrepute to the organization? That's a different thing. But lunch hours are essentially free time that you can obviously eat or take a nap or doom scroll if you want to, right? But what's important is that the work, whatever it is you're in charge of, you need to make sure that the work is getting done. So is it or is it not? I think that needs to be the focus. And my hope is that leaders especially leaders who have been a bit more helicopter type of style and, micromanaging and things like that. I hope that it has, loosened the reins for them a little bit, especially when it comes to the work that's actually getting done. I remember reading something where, obviously, researchers and sociologists are going crazy with all this stuff now. And it was a report that showed how much productivity had actually increased with remote work. I think people don't like to read those reports. They don't like to read that because it like smacks in the face of what they initially thought. And I don't think people want to believe it. And, you get the culture questions and you get all these things like, oh, but what about this? And it's like, well, do we need a new culture, right? Is this a part of our new culture? These are questions that people and orgs and leaders from C-suite and below are going to have to start considering, because the workforce has changed, truthfully, forever, to be honest. And I'm curious to see what that's going to mean. So to answer your question, I am very optimistic about that, but I think there's still people who are fighting that a little bit.
I am so glad, by the way, that you raised micromanagement. One of the reliefs on the behalf of other people that I do think the pandemic hopefully brought into the world was a diminished ability to truly be micromanaged by leaders. There are two stories that come to mind that I just have to share. They both happened when I was working with the city. I'm just going to say. One was a boss. So there was this iPhone-like device called the BlackBerry that I had in several of my city jobs. I remember at first getting a BlackBerry, this remote phone with email capabilities, was seen as such a treat. I viewed it as a curse. But I'll never forget, a boss of mine had me send an email to someone somewhere, and she literally stood next to me and she said, "Scott, you're typing too slow on your BlackBerry. You need to move faster. You need to move faster." As if by sitting there listening to her tell me to move faster, faster, faster was going to actually save time. I was stopping what I was doing to listen to her rage away about this. And I'm a bad typist. If I go type fast, it's going to screw up. But, she couldn't have done that with me working at home. Similarly, when I worked as a staff attorney doing litigation, I once had a supervising attorney who was notorious for this. She literally would stand behind you and guide your fingers as you typed on the keyboard the words on the brief that you were writing. And she could never do that. I feel like for anyone who might have worked for her, the pandemic was probably this sweet breath of freedom. And yes, you want to say something, so please do.
Oh wow, I'm in shock. I'm in shock, Scott. Like I can't. I mean, like physically coming over you and like
she would walk behind the desk. So the desk would be facing the door. She would come in. It wasn't just me. Walk behind the chair that I was sitting in, facing the keyboard and my computer terminal, and stand over and press my fingers letter by letter as I was typing the exact words that she wanted me to say. That's
insane.
Bleep and brief. Yes, it was insane.
Wow. I've heard a lot of things in my time at the city, and I'm sure we could go on and on about those types of stories, but that is a new one. Okay, that's a new one. I have not heard of something like that. That's wild on so many levels.
I somehow feel victorious having managed to pull a story that you've never heard out of my hat somewhere. But all of that also goes as to micromanagement, which is one of the reasons people leave their job. And that goes as to the podcast that you have, which I wanted to talk about because all of this is sort of leading into what you're discussing. The sun being too bright and unmodulated, among other things, can cause people to leave. But if you're able to use the pandemic and work from home as well as actual meaningful studies that you read and then choose to implement into your leadership style, you have the opportunity to be able to, with that helios-like distance from the surface of the earth and that ability to think through the big picture that comes with that, perhaps not be that boss that has talent leave. What are some of the general conclusions that you have found with the interviews that you've been through in that podcast as to why good people leave?
Great question. So, one of the things that really intrigued me about the pandemic was this mass exodus of employees from the workforce. And so I wanted to know why people would leave during a time of instability.
Yeah.
And so I started this show called Why I Left to have people essentially share their own stories, right? The show was never supposed to be, and still it's not about me. I'm the facilitator in all this. But I think we're all so connected in this human experience. And one of those threads, although there's many, but the thread that I my niche is based on, is that thread of work. We've all worked at a job and we've all left the job, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily. So I wanted to talk with people about why they were leaving. And what I found is that, what's interesting is that you would initially think people were leaving because of, management or things like that. Because I didn't know which route it was going to go. And most of the conversation, yes, there's some of that, leadership was in a way like they just didn't really align with that and they wanted to really take those next steps. But a lot of it had to do with inside. It had to do with them as a person. What did the pandemic give people? It gave them space. It gave them time. Forcibly, it gave them that space and time. And people had no choice but to sit back and think about what it is that they're doing with their life. They're seeing all of this death and sorrow and fear and all of this, and they're equating it to, well, I've been fearful about doing this thing. Why not now? Why not try said thing right now? I got all this time. Why not give it a shot? And so what I'm learning is that, and what I have learned is that fear, and it's gonna sound very cliche, but fear is I won't curse, but fear is something else, right? Fear is something else, and it has a grip on people in ways that we can and cannot even fathom. But when you let go of that fear and really take a chance on whatever your thing is, and that could be a solo venture, right? Becoming an entrepreneur or solopreneur, or truthfully just pivoting into another industry that you really want to get a part of. People then gave themselves the grace to do it. And so they went out and they searched for it. And so I have been very impressed and truthfully inspired by hearing these stories from all across the world, yours included, right? That really talk to everything that we all experience in our lives. We're at a place that truthfully we may be there, we may like what we do, but we're there because we probably have a family to support or support ourselves or whatever. But we have this thing in the back that we're like, you know what, I really want to do this thing, but I'm nervous, right? What about the money? What about this? What about that? And people just really said, you know what? F it. I'm going to try this thing. If it works, great. If it doesn't, at least I tried and I can say I did it. And that's what you see. People are having these and had these revelations, and they really went out and finally acted on it. And you see these beautiful, beautiful stories that are coming together of, my motto is real stories from real people, of normal folks, just like me and you, who have experienced a chance in their work life to do something different. And they've had the support of friends, families, and family members and others to do that. But most importantly, they gave themselves permission. And that's what I love to hear. That's what I love to see. And that's why I started it.
Brian, some of the most fulfilling work that I've done as a coach has been with clients who have felt that tap on the shoulder or that inner voice. I call it the call to be something different than they might be on the road towards. We're both lawyers. Lawyers tend to be risk averse, and lawyers very frequently make the decision to enter that profession at a very young age when they might not be intellectually, emotionally, spiritually self-developed, right out of college, age 22, 23, 24 sometimes. And because of the debt that law school and similar institutions, medical school just as well, put you through, as well as that intrinsic caution that can lead someone into a profession like law, they may feel that following that call is particularly risky, particularly scary. And then there are social prestige factors that, as well as monetary factors. I don't know that I can see myself as someone not making $350,000 a year, or I don't know that I can see myself as having given up a socially respectable career where I'm wearing a suit or every day and I throw around that ESQ after my name and people tremble in fear, or that MD or whatever degree they might have. What fears do you see as most common? But if you have, even more so than that, advice that you might have learned from your podcast that those seeking to listen to the call and maybe act could take with them to just push past those barriers, what might it be?
Scott, what I would say is we're not going to have, well, at least in our lifetime, it's highly unlikely that we'll have another time period that the pandemic afforded us. This time of immense forcible pause and reflection. But I think we can learn from that and say, you know what? If you are going through a period in your life professionally where it's like, you know what, I don't know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. What I would say, my top piece of advice is you need to take a forcible pause and reflection for yourself, genuinely, to sit back and think about what it is you're doing, what it is you're trying to do, and or what it is that you hope and or want to do. Because that's where the magic happens. And look, it doesn't have to be one day, but you need to, over a period of time, you need to be very intentional to say, I am going to sit back, think about what it is I'm trying to do. What does my future really look like? And then plan it out. And it's not going to be perfect. And the plan that you scope initially, truthfully, it will likely fall apart a little bit. You may think you're going in this straight line, but there's going to be some off ramps. But whatever that prize is at the end, always make sure you're working towards that. So that's the biggest piece of advice that I would give, is that we all need to do a better job of taking time to ourselves. Obviously, that gets hard when you have a significant other, have kids, have a demanding job, all of that. And I get it. But you need to actually do that, because that's then going to help you really think about what it is you truly want. I had a similar experience, truthfully, in all of this. And speaking about some of the pandemic work, I mentioned that, we ended up saving lives, right?
Yeah.
And that touched me in a way that I did not anticipate. Like I said, I'm not clinical or anything like that. We're both attorneys. No one was ever happy to see me coming through, right? You're not happy to see me come through or sitting at the other across the table from me. But it was the first time in my career that I was like, oh, wow, like the saving life. I was like, wow, like this is, like, I feel like I accomplished something. I felt like, oh, wow, like I did a thing. And it became very addictive to me in that I'm never going to be bedside like that. I get that. But what can I do that has a similar impact? And that's what I started chasing. So before I was, to be honest, chasing titles, chasing money, right? Then after this experience, then it was like, oh, I think I found like purpose-driven work. Like, how can I have an impact on people's lives in that way? Maybe not, saving is a bit like life and death is a bit much, right? But similar. And I end up finding that through some of the work I'm doing now, because, and I'm, really trying to redefine healthcare education. So I focus a lot on like the high school cohort, early careerists, right? But exposing them to the opportunities that exist within healthcare. And so I lead a couple programs at my organization now, and I got a chance to see learning happening. You expose a young kid to all the opportunities that exist in healthcare, and I'm literally watching light bulbs go off in their head, like, oh, I could do this. I didn't know about this thing. Doctor, nurse feels so far away, but I could be a medical assistant or a PCA or a rad tech and eventually make my way up. Oh, Brian, tell me more about that. And that then became my thing, because now what you're doing is, when you're providing this information to individuals, you're giving them an opportunity to make a difference in their lives, their families' lives, and potentially other folks in their communities. So and it may sound a little dramatic, but I believe you have the ability to really impact an entire generation by just exposing them to these types of things. And now that's the bone that I'm not letting go. And so I ended up finding a way. I'm not going to be saving lives, quote unquote, in the life or death type of scenario, but still chasing that. That was the prize. Like, how do I get that feeling? I've had a couple little, little off ramps here and there, but now I really like, oh, perfect. This is what is really driving me now. And granted, love doing it in the healthcare space, having a great time doing it here, but fully recognize that, at times, leadership changes, things can happen, you never know what goes on. But the type of work that I'm doing is truthfully healthcare agnostic. And so, obviously I hope this doesn't happen, right? But if things end up like, hey, this is no longer needed, I can find another place where this type of thing is needed. And so that's what I would say. So, and I, to kind of bring it all home, I sat down and gave myself that time to reflect. I'm not just preaching all this stuff for the sake of just saying it. Like, I actually did it myself to say, you know what is it that I like now I've done this experience? Like, what is that I actually want to do now? And this has taken me down a path that I never would have imagined. Because yes, lawyers, we are risk averse. And I'm trying to kind of flip that on its head a little bit because I'm taking a few risks.
Yeah. I'm hearing, as you talk earlier about the period in your life in which you were chasing title and money and all of that social prestige, which I did myself for decades. So you're not alone. And we both know we're not alone with that. Almost as Helios chasing the sun, as opposed to connecting with that inner light, the thing that really brings out his true force and passion, and truly becoming the sun. And that is something that is of infinite power. You say, Brian, that, I'm not going to be saving lives. I'm going to respectfully argue with you. You don't know whose life, nor do any of us know whose life might have been saved, because if it weren't for the fact that they were doing something that gave them that purpose, that gave them that connection to what they need to be, they might not have had the resilience to make it another day sometimes. And I say that as someone who, due to job situations and ups and downs in my career, both working within organizations as entrepreneur, has had lows in which that momentary flash, should I continue into the next day, has come to mind. But that purpose, that connection to what I'm doing, that you're providing to people, that you describe seeing that light, that in me at least has saved me.
Wow, Scott, I appreciate you sharing that. And that's a great point. It's something I guess I don't think about directly in that regard, but yeah, if you take it down that line, you potentially could save a life in that way, because you've given them a space or an outlet to do something, right? And that that's a great point.
You brought it out. It only came to my mind because the light that you as Helios brought in this conversation illuminated something inside me. So actually, the thanks is all the way from me to you, Brian. Really, there's a lot for me to thank you for during this conversation. You raised so much that was interesting. And the conversation went in so many different directions that it's a little bit difficult for me to figure out what one takeaway might be from this conversation. But I am going to perhaps think about looking at how we manage others from a bird's eye, or from a helios at the top of the firmament view. The pandemic, as we talked about, forced people to pull back from some of these micromanaging or overly domineering or smothering leadership styles. But perhaps as people process it, as it becomes digested by our culture, and as people listen to shows like yours, maybe this episode, which again you brought so much into, the lessons will inspire them to not be that manager whose light shines so bright that the people who work for them literally get burnt to a crisp. If there is one thing that you would like the audience to take away from our conversation, or just something that you forgot to say earlier, Brian, by all means, share that with us.
What I would say as we continue to talk about Helios and, given that that's my mythical god of choice, I think everybody, so listeners, viewers, I should say, you all have your own light. And I would suggest that you never, and I tend to not speak in absolutes, but I will here, you never let anybody dim your light. You never let doubt dim your light, because what you have to say or some of the things that you do, it's important. And at times you just may be in the wrong environment where your light is not appreciated. And if that's the case, it's time to go. And you go to a place where your light is appreciated. So never lose that. Never forget about that. Because I think we all have value to bring in the situations and scenarios and environments in which we show up. But just know, look, it's honest. You may not be for everybody, but you are for somebody. And so don't let other people dim your light. Don't let your doubts dim your light. Go where you can shine.
With that in mind, where can people go to have more of your light shine on them, Brian Aquart?
So Scott, you all can definitely check me out on LinkedIn. I tend to post a lot there, so you can find me there, Brian Aquart, Aquart, and Brian with an I. Also, if you want to check out the show, my podcast is called Why I Left. And so you can find me there at 𝗦𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗀𝗋.co. And there you'll have all the links to the YouTube, the Apple, Spotify, all of that there. But you can go to the website and that'll take you wherever you need to go.
And I have no doubt that plenty of people will be visiting all of those places after they watch this conversation and take in everything that you had to say, Brian. For those of you who enjoyed this episode, please come back again. There's lots of great leadership tips along with awesome mythical storytelling to come and insights that will bring out your own inner light over and over again. So if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to press the like button, leave a comment below, and by all means, subscribe, because I want to see you back here over and over again. If you have myths or mythical figures that you would like us to discuss, please leave those requests in the comments. And then additionally, if you have leadership questions or problems that you would like us to dive into on this show, I want to hear about it so we can help you out. Brian, it has been a genuine pleasure having you here today.
Likewise, Scott, thank you for having me. Love the show, love the content, and very excited to stay in touch, to be honest.
We're going to be in touch, definitely. And I hope to be in touch with every single person who watches this show. In the meantime, always remember, I want your future to be epic.